For nearly 200 years, the Knights of the Temple of Solomon were the epitome of Christianity's medieval crusade against Islam. The Templars had maintained a standing army and had constructed fortifications throughout the Holy Land, all financed by a vast business empire created in Western Europe. But in the year 1291, the Islamic Mamluks of Egypt had finally driven the Templars and all the Crusaders from Palestine. The Templars' entire reason for being was the defense of Christian holy sites. What role could there now be for the warrior monks? If they had no role, why did they still need such wealth? The triumph of Islam over the Christians in the Holy Land was a blow to Western European prestige, but not a total catastrophe. Enthusiasm for major crusades had declined over the last century, as the Christians had suffered defeat after defeat. To many, there must have been some reason why God had seemingly abandoned the Crusaders. The sins of pride, arrogance, and avarice were accusations the Templars had faced many times, but the Templars had never once given up the fight against the Muslims. The Grand Master himself had died in their last battle at Acre, and the remaining Templars had all fought to the death. For the order as a whole, the annihilation of the Christian state was merely a temporary setback.
The Templars fought very gallantly to defend Acre in 1291, and even though they were driven back on Cyprus in the course of the 1290s, there's plenty of evidence to show that they were continuing to maintain the cause of the crusade. They hired fleets, they attacked the Egyptian and Syrian mainlands, they attempted to establish a base on the island of Ruad off Tortosa. It was unsuccessful, but the will was there to do it.
Neither did the Templars halt their recruiting and fundraising activities. Crusading enthusiasm had dampened in Europe, but had by no means died. The Templars had no difficulty attracting new recruits.
An individual's motivation for joining one of the military orders, I am quite sure, was almost entirely religious. So if he succeeded in saving his soul, then from his point of view, he was victorious. The fact that he had lost a battle, lost a fight, that the Crusader states had fallen was, I won't say secondary, it was a disaster. But as far as the individual motivation of a recruit is concerned, if he fought and died in the cause that he believed in and went to heaven, then he, as an individual, was victorious.
With a new headquarters in Cyprus, new recruits, a highly productive network still providing immense funds, the Order of the Temple continued its 200-year-old struggle against Islam. After each catastrophe, the resilient Templars had always regrouped and returned to the fray.
In the early hours of October the 13th, 1307, the officials of Philip the Fair, the King of France, suddenly arrested the Templars in the lands which the king controlled and charged them with a variety of heretical crimes, of obscenities, of the worship of an idol. and very quickly extracted confessions from many of the Templars that had been arrested at that time.
The charges brought against the Templars could not possibly be more serious. They included treason with the Muslims, worshipping an idol, denying Jesus Christ, spitting on the cross, sleeping with the devil, eating the ashes of their dead, impregnating virgins, and various homosexual activities. If the Templar Knights were found guilty of any one of these crimes, they would be burned alive. More than 5,000 Templars throughout France had been arrested in a highly coordinated dawn swoop. Even the Grand Master of the Order of the Temple, James of Malay, had been captured, and he too had confessed to many of the accusations. Could one of the most respected orders of the Church really have been a secret society of devil worshippers? At the same time as the arrest, Philip, the King of France, had seized all the Templar lands and properties and urged the crown heads of Europe to do the same. But not all of them were convinced of the Templars' guilt.
Those rulers who were not linked to the French monarchy were very, very sceptical, as were many independent commentators. The Italians in particular, who wrote about it at the time, were quite convinced there was a financial motive behind it. And we have to take their view seriously. Nobody knew more about money than the Italians in the early 14th century. So there was widespread scepticism. Edward II of England, for instance, said that he simply did not believe it, that these had been gallant defenders of the Holy Land and important servants of the English crown, and that he found the whole thing impossible to believe and quite astounding.
It was well known that the French crown was in severe financial difficulties. In the preceding years, the king had debased the coinage, expelled the Lombard bankers, and confiscated all properties of the Jews. Philip was exceptionally pious and probably even believed the accusations brought against the Templars. If they were true, it was his duty to purify his realm. The arrest of the Templars, however, was a long-awaited opportunity for the king to assert his dominance over an increasingly weak papacy.
One notable aspect of the trial is that the reigning Pope, Clement V, wasn't told in advance, so it came as much as a surprise to him as it did to the Templars, and he was very affronted by it. He was perhaps less concerned about the fate of the Templars than he was about his own authority, I think, and therefore, having seen that the event had occurred, he was most interested in reasserting his own position vis-à-vis a powerful secular monarch like Philip IV. So he actually tried to take over the trial, having found that he couldn't really reverse it. And this is the reason that the trial spread to other countries, because the Pope ordered a general arrest of the Templars in other countries in order to try to find the truth of the charges that were brought against the order.
The intervention of the Pope was what the Templars had been waiting for. All immediately withdrew their damning confessions, as it was a custom of the time for an accused man to confess and later retract when he was back on safe ground. But the Templars were blind to the political realities. Europe was seeing a massive power struggle, nothing less than the birth of a nation-state, as the King of France attempted to limit the centuries-old political influence of the Church in France. Nothing would stand in his way. King Philip was set on destroying the Templars and had launched an enormous public relations offensive, circulating the sensational confessions throughout his kingdom. To the people of medieval France and Europe, news of the blasphemous Templar confessions was profoundly shocking. Even today, many people still believe that these confessions must have contained at least a grain of truth.
Some historians have actually believed that the Templars were guilty of the crimes of which they were accused, and they point to the large number of confessions that were made, and indeed the great detail that one can see in the confessions of participation in obscene and blasphemous rites, which the Templars were accused of. I think, though, for those of us looking back on the 20th century, a century scarred by governmental pressures, both mental and physical, in particular, a century in which torture has been used extensively by most of the governments of the world, we, I think, can have a good deal less faith in confessions extracted under that kind of pressure. And indeed, most of these Templars were tortured in all kinds of horrendous and painful ways. And not one of us could say that we wouldn't be forced to confess almost anything, perhaps anything, if we were put under sufficient pressure.
The confessions were damning evidence enough, but following 2 centuries of suspicion and rumour, they found fertile ground in the minds of many Europeans. The Templars' vast wealth, their failure to defend the Holy Land, their unusual relationship with the Muslims and Islamic culture was enough to convince the Pope that there may be some truth in the allegations. But more importantly for the papacy, its own prestige was at stake. The Pope had seen no option but to abandon the Order of the Temple. The Templars had few among their ranks who were capable of defending themselves against such abominable charges.
The fact that the Templars regarded themselves and were regarded by others as unqualified in strictly religious or doctrinal matters was not a problem in the early years, but I suspect that it laid them open to criticism later, or at least was like a chink in their armour. The fact that they had always claimed not to be scholarly in religious matters meant that they could be accused of deviant religious beliefs or activities. And they would find it very, very difficult to justify themselves or to explain this, because in the past they had never claimed any knowledge. So, in a sense, their only excuse was ignorance.
The trial of the Templars took 5 years. Midway through, the King of France had 54 Templars burned as relapsed heretics, quickly ending a brief but spirited Templar defense. Finally, in March 1312, 5 years after the arrests, the Pope announced the abolition of the Order of the Temple of Solomon. All of their vast lands and treasure were handed over to the Knights Hospitaller, much to the fury of the French king. Philip immediately sued the Hospitallers for the legal costs of the trial.